comics and video games and anything else you'll let me work on.
Please let me know.
Are you too much?
Yeah. How do we make this technology is good.
Better.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Way better.
That was awesome.
So Shannon, you were saying you're an artist and cool?
I didn't know when I moved to LA that there were different jobs. I thought you moved here and did all the jobs. So, a lack of an internet that
He was mayor for a while.
Mayor McCheese.
All the jobs.
All the jobs. Ta-da. So today, and I'm David Gallaher. I write video games, I write comic books, I write television shows occasionally. Today we're going to talk a little bit about world building. So I want to start with our guests. Guys, in world building obviously is the tapestry, the framework by which you build your stories. Can you talk a little bit about, and any of you are welcome to jump in at any time, but you can talk a little bit about, as a creator, why do you need to build the world? Why can't you just start with telling your story? Any of you?
We're all
You're all jumping in. It's free for all.
Alright, I guess I'll jump in first. It's really nice and good to have a plot, but without having a foundation on which to rest it, things you find plot holes. Like you have to figure out. You know what?
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
I'm from New York. I can project. I'm good.
No, we're gonna take this out.
Thank you. Blessed. That's so much better. So, you know, when you're trying to create a story, when you're trying to tell a story, there is that kind of fundamental problem or adventure that you want to explore, right? But without figuring out how your universe works, you're going to take more and more time trying to get the story. So, for example, I wrote a book called The Wilds. It's creator-owned story, so I got to build it from the ground up. And I started with this basic idea. I was like, all right, cool, zombies, but not gross. Let's do it. But I wanted to listen. It's rough. I was writing a zombie book in the time of like The Walking Dead, so like that was, I guess, a bold move. But I knew that I wanted to write about marginalized people, right? Brown people, lady people, queer people. I wanted to write about how we, how in the ways that we are marginalized but expected and exploited, but expected to kind of go along with it. I had an idea, so I started to write. And then I'd get to a point and go, wait, okay, so like these zombies work how? Okay, wait, now that changes everything about what I wrote before. So I have to go back and fix, X, Y, and Z. Oh, wait, what's the social structure of the people that we're talking about? All right, no, wait, that changes everything that I've written so far. And so I would find myself rewriting things over and over until I realized that I'm a big RPG person. I love role-playing games.
Oh, role-playing games are the best.
It's one of my favorite things. I read the source books for fun, like not. And I was like, wait, what is it that drew me to RPGs? It was this immersive world and wanting to work in it. All right, if people that are going to read my work are to get lost in my world, then I have to think of all of the nooks and crannies, right? Because one of the things in RPGs that you find is that like you'll write an adventure and then your players want to go that way, and you're like, I didn't even think of that. And so, in order for a comic to be immersive, any story, you really have to have an understanding as the creator, and that includes the artist. If you're working with an artist, or if you're a cartoonist and a wizard, that's fine. You have to understand how everything works so that everything rings true. One of the things that bothers me the most about like watching a movie or a TV show or whatever is when they'll break the rules of their own universe because they didn't think of a thing. I'm like, well, now I don't believe it anymore. I will believe people flying if you give me X, Y, and Z rules, but if you break it, then I don't believe it.
I feel like if you're going to do something, you can only break the rules once. And it has to be awesome, and it has to be fun.
And for a reason.
And it has to be for a reason. So if you're going to break the rules, but don't keep breaking the rules. Breaking the rules once is funny. It becomes that holy shit moment where you're like, oh my god, I had no idea Batman could fly.
But you're not, see, that's the thing, right? You are not breaking the rules. It's your universe.
Right.
So what you're doing is you're going, here's an exception to it, just like in real life, right?
Batman can fly in real life?
Yeah. I don't know if you had action figures, but I fly right across.
Oh, actually, it'll be Bruce Wayne.
longest,
Bruce
you know,
Wayne,
Lucy
yeah.
longest.
Wayne Airlines.
Anyway, that's my long of the day.
Right.
Yeah, I think you need to world build, in part just to establish the tone, because I think world building isn't just like what is, like, it's important when you're doing the genre stuff, like what are the rules of the zombies, but it's also, if you were just writing about kids in high school, and you want them to start a pasta sauce business using the equipment in the science lab, like you can do that on Saved by the Bell, you can't do that on 90210, like the worlds have been built differently. So you have to keep that in mind even for just what might be like a more grounded or day-to-day sort of story. The world building is still part of the telling. It doesn't have to have magic necessarily, but it's even more important to keep the tone is I think the thing.
It keeps you from falling out of the story. So I was lucky enough, one of my first bosses was Stan Lee. And if you read a Marvel comic in the old days, it would have at the beginning of each comic a little paragraph that would tell you the world. Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider. Because the assumption was you needed to have that sort of sense of what the world is, and it made it a lot more enjoyable to jump into the story. So it's also a different thing when you're building your own world versus you're maintaining a world edited at DC Comics for Wildstorm, and a lot of what we would do is like, hey, we're gonna break the world, but we're not gonna break it that much. These are the parameters. Pitch me back the parameters you would like to break it, and then we're gonna tell you yes or no if you took it too far.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really great example too, both Marvel and DC and stuff like that. The way that I think about it is, if you did a multiverse event of whatever, even if it's creator-owned stuff, if you did that kind of event, could you tell your main universe from like a weird spin-off universe? If not, then you need to tighten that up. Like, I think about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and I'm like, every one of them spider people came out of a wildly different universe, right? Like, and you can tell, you're like, that was just straight up in black and white. This one is clearly in an anime. This one is a pig. And watching them all work together, right, in that end scene, you're like, oh, Spider-Man can do things that no one else can do, right? You can pull hammers out of hammer space, he moves differently, and I was like, cool. So in your own world.
You say hammer space? He pulls hammers out of hammer space?
Yeah, hammer space, like Tom and Jerry.
Oh, I thought you meant like a sea hammer.
I was thinking MC too.
Can't touch this.
There was a cartoon.
I work in that cartoon.
But yeah, like.
Yeah, MC is a cool dude.
Yeah. So it pulls hammers out of hammer space.
It's on YouTube.
It's a real thing. It exists.
Tell
yeah.
me about one too. We can talk about that later. It's really fun.
Sorry, I don't know if you know this, but we're also like nerds.
We're all three from a different universe. Collide a little.
I'm a pharaoh.
So we've talked a little bit about the importance of why we need to build a world, but how does world building actually improve the story? Do you find that it adds to the mythology? Do you find that it adds to the physics of the world? Talk a little bit about the intricacy and intimacy in which you build your world. So we've talked a little bit about why they're important, but how do they improve your stories as authors? Let's start with Shannon.
I think they're a roadmap on where you can go and how far you can push things. And if you establish the rules and it makes you aware, okay, I'm about to break my own rules, so I need to address this with the audience in some way.
What would you say is, can you give us an intimate example of, like for example, from Gravedigger, when you were working with Gravedigger, can you give
Grave
us?
Slinger.
Thank you.
It's all good. Gravedigger's another comic, and you should check it out, it's a good book.
Grave Slinger, yeah, so give us an example of maybe from that or something else you worked on that could really talk about intimately how you built that world and give us an example.
It was a supernatural Western, but it was set in 1888 in Yuma, so not that a whole lot of people were really caring too much about the history of 1888 Yuma, but the whole premise was this was something that happened that just nobody else was aware of. So I had to immerse myself in what the history was of that period and figure out ways that you could still tell the story but have it plausible that nobody saw any of this stuff but the people that actually came into contact with it. So I think a lot of times it's just sort of having those guidelines for yourself. So you're like, all right, this is where I'm stretching things. How am I going to stretch this to where it still fits within what I set out to do?
That's when we worked on, just personal anecdote. When I worked on High Moon for DC Comics, we did the same thing. We were like, well, Jim Bowie, in this weird part of his life, went to the San Saba silver mines, and he was the only person that come back from that expedition. So what happened? That's a real thing. He was the only person to come back. So what happened? Did he encounter werewolves? Let's talk about that.
I'm pretty sure he did.
It's always werewolves.
Yeah, well, especially with a title like High Moon. But we were able to build the mythology around that and say, these are the tent poles by which we're going to tell the rest of the story and the framework around. And it sounds like you went for a very authentic historical place and then literally bent history around what could sustain your story.
Yeah, I drove out to Yuma and did some research, took photos, so I knew where everything was in relation to where I was putting it in the story and how long it would take to get there by horse versus, you know.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And that was fun, that research process.
Oh, it was the best. When I'm taking 2 weeks off to go ride horses in Yuma, it's for comics, it must be done.
You break that up, right?
Yeah. What about you, Norm? Can you give us an example of that level of intimacy, of world building that sort of really lent an air of authenticity to the stories you were telling?
Yeah, I had a book come out just in March called HAPHAVEN. It's about a 13-year-old girl who steps on a crack and does in fact break her mother's back. So she has to travel to HAPHAVEN, which is the magical world from which all of Earth's superstitions draw their power. And the world building on that is, knocking on wood, four-leaf clovers, spilling salt, horseshoes, like all of that is stuff you're familiar with, but it all comes from different regions, different cultures, but we kind of lump it together into this word superstition. So I had to figure out the mechanism of like why can all this stuff be tied together? And
So you traveled there in real life?
I did, yeah, no, but I wrote basically like a law book for like how it all works, and then that way when I was taking the character through the story, I understood what she could come up against and what like just wouldn't make sense, and tailored it to that. But it had to be like I had to know exactly like the ways in which it would work, the ways in which the characters could abuse that power, those kinds of things. And it took a long. It was like you said, a lot. Like you do a draft and then you're like, that doesn't work, and you start over. And eventually, I just sat down and I said, okay. And I've got like a 30-page document on how it all works. And most of that didn't make it into the book, but I could know then.
And that too, so I think it gives you three things. And that is, it relieves anxiety, because it is really stressful to be able to do anything. I can't, when someone, imagine, you're in school, or I think most of us have been in school. So you're in school, and they go, this is your assignment. Write about whatever you want. And you're like, what does that mean? Like, I don't understand. And so giving yourself parameters really alleviates your anxiety, and that helps you kind of create. I think it gives it weight, and that's kind of like, I think what you were saying, where like, whatever the universe is, whether it's historical or something that you developed completely yourself, you knowing that stuff makes it seem like it's real. So like, for example, when you meet a real person in life and you're starting to get to know each other, you clearly, even though you don't know everything about them, you're like, you have experiences that seem like they actually happened to you, whether or not they're telling the truth, I don't know. But having that weight and having that knowledge behind you helps inform how you write characters. It helps inform kind of where your characters will go. And then I think the third thing it does is inspiration. One of the things that I find most inspiring is reading like weird RPG source books.
Oh man, I love RPG source books.
When I was a kid, my mom kept a bunch of weird crap in her closet, mostly because I would go in there and she was like, I don't know, I'm gonna put stuff there for you to find, I guess. And one of the things that
That's the story right there. Can
my
you
mom's
imagine?
best. It was like, there was so much in that closet, and it would always change, and I was like, why does this happen? But one of the things she put in there, it's Narnia and the TARDIS. There was like rock, like sculpting tools in there at one point. Anyway, I found this supplemental source book for an RPG called Talos Lanta, which I didn't understand what the heck an RPG was, so I just picked it up, and it had really pretty drawings in it, right? And I read that thing cover to cover multiple times, and all it was races and places in this world. It would describe a region, and give you a little map. I love maps. If you're writing a thing or drawing a thing, figure out your map. It's literally the coolest part of any book. It would show you where, like the big map, where this thing was, And then you'd go in and go, in this region, these are the things you'll find, and these are the people you'll find. And because this is a coast, they're fishermen, or whatever, or fish people in this case. And what that did was teach me kind of how to make a location and the people in the location make sense. So, for example, mountain people probably aren't going to be like deep sea fishermen. Probably not. What does it mean to live in a mountain? You have better lung capacity, you have this, you have that. Cool. Even in an imaginary world, then, what does it look like when someone is from space as opposed to from the ground?
And how are their governments different?
Wildly.
Yeah, you know, and so it...
And friendships.
Right.
How are friendships different? Like, there are certain cultures in real life, as in fake life, where you are more likely to instantly become much more intimate friends. Like, who are you? We're going to be best friends. That's it. Let's go on an adventure, right? Hobbits. Like, who are you? Best friends. Let's go. Let's go eat lunch. And that's it.
There's dwarves in everyone.
I love dwarves, all right? They're very cranky. But, like, that's the kind of stuff that makes you think about, all right, we have to have the curmudgeon. We have to have the kind of people. I just went to Sweden, and their personal space is like a solid meter apart. That's 3 feet. And I was like, how do you take the bus? And they're like, if there are people sitting in one of the 3-seaters, we don't sit there. It's like, how do you function? Like, and it just gets you, like, I get inspired by thinking about that kind of stuff, because then you think about your characters, right? What would my character do in this situation? Well, they're from Sweden, so they wouldn't sit next to this person on the train, or like whatever.
So, I find that stuff really fascinating. When you built the world of the wilds, obviously you were trying to tell a story about the zombies. Did you have to break down? Did you find yourself, I'm talking like really personal, did you find yourself being like, well, my zombies are going to be different from other zombies, and then break into like the biological, mythological, and undead elements of zombies, and how your zombies were different?
Yes and no. So originally they were more like the crazies.
Right.
It was I knew it was a disease. It wasn't supernatural. I did that because.
So that was your first checklist.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to, because then you have to talk about ghosts and stuff. I'm like, I like that, but not right now. But originally it was much more. They're still alive. They're not dead. But they have flowers growing out of their face and stuff. It's pretty cool. But they were just like bonkers people at first, and then my co-creator was like, I was like, what do you like to draw? Because I don't want you to draw a bunch of stuff with my board out of your mind. And she was like, I really like cute girls, nature, and like mutated stuff. And I was like, well, it's got cute girls, but I'll figure out the rest. And then from there I went, okay, how do you make this visually something that will stand out on a shelf? Not because I want to sell units, but because I want people to pick it up and look at it. Nature is beautiful, but it can also be cold. Things in nature that are beautiful are often poisonous, right? So I started thinking about that kind of stuff and then incorporated it into the zombies. I broke it down to like straight up like different blood types react to this disease different ways, and so like biologically like whatever. Because I was like, well, why would some people survive and not others, right? Like what changes? Oh, what do they have in common? Blood type. And I started thinking about diseases that affect some blood types and not others. I thought about like sickle cell. I thought about the bubonic plague and stuff like that. And then I thought about those sad zombie things that have the fungus like growing out of their skull. I was like, all right, that, but not gnarly. Like that was pretty. So I get deep into that.
So first we're going to get into tips about people for creators who are interested in world building. And we're going to talk about sort of failures you've had in world building. So first, let's talk about ways that some tips you might give to people for successful world building. We'll start with you, Shannon. What sort of tip would you give somebody who is interested in building a world? Where should they start? Should they start from like the religion? Should they start from the concept of their story? Should they start from how their government functions?
This is a question that happens with creatives a lot, where you're like, I don't even want to read that other thing because I don't want to be influenced by it, but I'm going to go and create the exact same thing as that other person that already has it out there because of my principles. And I never understood that. So I'm a big believer in doing the detective work, but if you're going to do a zombie story, you should be watching 28 Days Later, Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, you know, George Romero, you should be up on all of that stuff so you're not traveling down the same path that's already been done. Or if you are, you're aware of it. You're like, that was really cool when Romero did that scene. I'm gonna do a scene like that, but not at the mall. It'll be at the skating rink. It'll be my homage scene.
That scene would be like roller derby sound.
It would be
Yes.
that. That is exactly what it would be. So, you know, I think that there's this sense a lot of times that as professionals, you're more pure if you're unaware of the world around you, and I think that is crap, because so many times I've been in meetings where people are pitching something, and I'm like, that's that thing I just saw 2 weeks ago, and if we put that out 6 months from now, regardless of the fact that this person pitching this was not aware of that thing, that just makes us chumps, doesn't make us, you know, pure storytellers. Because the audience, they're just going in and they're like, I already saw this. They have George Clooney in it. You guys couldn't afford George Clooney. So it's, I think it's good to do your work, your legwork, before moving forward, so you can navigate it as you want.
What about you, Norm? What would you say is a good tip for somebody interested in, so Shannon said, do the research. What sort of tip would you suggest to somebody who's interested in sort of building a world from scratch?
I'd say go into it knowing that you're going to do more work than the reader needs, and anything like don't fall in love with it just because you're like, oh, I've got a great idea on like how vampires work. I'm gonna tell this vampire story, and then that idea, even if it was the spark of the story, if it doesn't have any place in your narrative once you've kind of gotten that far with it, don't be afraid to throw it aside. You can always use it again later somewhere else or something. But so often I get lost in things that they're not storytelling, they're just ideas on like how things work, and that can be dangerous, I think. So just know going in, like you're going to do a lot of work that nobody's going to see, and you got to be okay with that.
And Vita?
I was gonna say, yeah, I'm a deep dive person, but I think it can be okay to start with a thing that you like. Think of it as like taking, not a trust wall, but I don't know, there's a bunch of movies and stuff where a character will step into space and then something, like the ground forms around their foot. Think of it that way, where it's like, boom, that's my story and that's cool. What else supports that? And what supports the things that support that? You can kind of build outward.
Like a mind map.
Yeah, that is a good way to put it. I should have just said that. But yeah, you can start with the thing that really interests you, and then that will lead you to all of the other stuff that will make it seem real, I guess.
I know that from, well, and that's actually something really important, Vita, that you mentioned, is that a lot of the work that you're going to be doing in world building should be seamless and invisible. There's a really great podcast I love called 99% Invisible. And it's all about design in the modern world. And they say good design should be 99% invisible. So when you're doing your world building, 99% of it shouldn't be seen by anybody who's reading the book. That 1% is going to be, you know, the world that your characters interact in. A personal example for me is I've been working on this video game for Ubisoft for the last year and a half. And every character in the game, every single character from the bartender to the janitor to the main character to the bad guys to the soldiers in the game has to have a biography written about them. So that's 240 biographies. And then every single character also has to have what we call a character cascade, which is where their character starts at the beginning of the story and where their character ends. So that janitor, how did that janitor decide to be a janitor? And what is their aspiration? What is the goal in their life? So, and every character has to start from this very Sisyphean, like, I'm stuck in this karmic loop until I am instigated upon by the main character. But that level of depth is, I know that before I started writing, I only primarily thought about my main characters. I primarily thought about what is the main character, what is the bad guy's arc, what is the main character's arc, what is the hero journey, what do our side characters have to do? But now, having worked in games, I'm now like, no. I mean, nobody else is going to see this, but it's important. Are we going to see that janitor again? Are we going to see that that soldier who just had one line, like, show up randomly again? If so, we really need to put the work in and determine what their trajectories are. And I think that that's really important.
What's the saying? Everyone's the hero of their own story.
Everyone's the hero of their own story. So even though it's a lot of work to write bios for every single character, they don't need to be long. But what is the janitor's heroic arc? What is the bartender's heroic arc? You know, what is their aspiration? What is it that brought them to that moment of the story? And by the end of the story, where will they be? Will there still be a bartender? Will they valiantly sacrifice their life to prevent their bar from burning? Who knows?
Oh my gosh.
I know. Well, I'm like heroic sacrifices in fire.
It's about cool stuff, right?
Yeah. And that said, though, I would caution, like, don't be afraid to be vague. Like, think about like Boba Fett in Empire. Like, there's nothing about, like, he's a bounty hunter. He's got some armor. Like, we don't know anything, and I don't think Lucas knew either. Everything we know about him came later because he captured everyone's imagination. But that was like you didn't need that bio then. Like, you just like cool armor, here to get Han. That's all we need. We're done. And now Mandalorian on Disney Plus.
That's cool, right? Like, so, like, show off how cool all this stuff in your world is. Like, what is that? I don't know. Make it as cool as possible.
Yeah.
But turn that to 11 on everything. Everything should be super cool in some way.
Right. Well, and that brings us back to what we talked about, the tips. So where can we see some failures? Sometimes we can go too deep, right? So what are some other failures you may have encountered in doing world building? Do you, for example, I can tell you that sometimes I will go so far off in a tangent that I've actually lost sight of the original concept of the book. So I'll be like, I'll keep iterating and iterating and iterating so that the thing that I was working on is so far off in left field that I've obsessed over the tiniest details and lost track of the main concept. Have you experienced that or similar?
I will sometimes look at things in terms of structure and form too much. So I will try and make things fit because I'm like, for example, the hero's journey. I'm like, these things happen in the hero's journey, and therefore they're going to happen in this, and this kind of character is the kind of character that gets that arc. And I will try and force this square peg into the round hole. And I've written an entire miniseries and had to scrap the whole thing and go, no, what makes sense for this universe and also for this story? Not structurally, but like, what feels right? I've done all this background work and, have this Bible. What's the story that makes sense for me to tell?
What about you, Norm?
I've gotten lost often when I think I'm planting the seed for like book 2, and it's really exciting, but like it's just got nothing to do with the book I'm working on yet. I'm just, you have to hopefully eventually come to and go like, no, like as cool as an idea as that is or whatever, it's got to go like this is what the story's about. And you get too excited about the future and taking the world other places because that's what you want. You want that RPG thing. You want Star Wars, and you want someday I'm gonna hire David to write a novel about this side character because I've got so much going on, and like you want that, but you just have to be careful. The narrative you're working on. I'm basically saying square peg round hole again.
No. It's different. You're right. You're saying like that makes so much sense. I do that too. I didn't realize you've changed that.
Oh.
Yeah, sometimes you want to show off all of this hard work that you've done, and you're not concentrating on what you need to be doing now.
Right.
Yeah. I'm gonna put that in my like vision board. Like, don't do this.
What about you, Shannon?
As a counter to what I said earlier about being aware of everything, I've seen a lot of creatives over the years not pursue something that they're passionate about because there's already something out there. And so I worked on the Spider-Man 2099 cartoon in the 90s. You guys all remember that, right?
Spider-Man Unlimited?
No, I'm Spider-Man 2099. So here's where I'm going with this story. That Spider-Man 2099 cartoon never came out because people at Fox found out the Warner Brothers decided, hey, let's take Batman and rip off Spider-Man 2099 and do a Batman Beyond show. And we suddenly pivoted, and I'm like, but we're in the right. You actually legitimately put out a Spider-Man 2099 comic. And so we pivoted at the last minute and put out Spider-Man on Counter-Earth with animal people. And it was just a crazy company decision to just shift entirely because they were worried that somebody else was doing something similar, instead of being true to what it was that they wanted to do. And so being a part of that made me really aware when I'm working on my own stuff that there's a million cop shows out there. If you love cop shows, just make a really good cop show. You know, if you like, there's a lot of general hospital, ER type surgical shows. My mom's gonna watch them all. She loves that stuff. So, you know, put Nathan Fillion in it, she's gonna watch it twice. So it's okay if it's something you're passionate about and you're bringing something new to it and you're invested in it. So I just, as you know, looking out at the audience here, if you've got something you want to do but you're worried about it, just make sure you're not doing exactly what somebody else is doing, but do your version of it, and that's okay. And that's what you should pursue.
I always think about songwriting with that. Like, there's only so many notes, there's only so many chords, there's only so many ways to say, like, hey, it feels really good when you're in love. You're never going to stop writing love songs. Nobody's ever going to go like, we got enough love songs, that's cool. Like, so, yeah, just do yours, and don't worry that Paul McCartney did better.
Yeah.
So do you guys find that sometimes when you're world building, I know I occasionally do this, I end up creating like monolithic groups for like, so sometimes you'll have like, for example, your version of the Empire or your version of Cobra, and it becomes these monolithic groups, like the bad guys, all universal and all evil. How do you guys, for example, counter or Sauron and his evil group? How do you, in your world building process, navigate away from just being like just good versus evil? Where do you add the shades of gray? How do you look at building different social, political, cultural, and religious groups rather than it being so polemic?
I think for me, I think it's okay to start there, but then I look at kind of how the real world works, and I look at how the groups work in the real world, and how, you know, for example, Christianity is a big banner. How many sects are there? So very many. And then I look at a church and go, how many different people are in this church? How do you experience, this is just talking about religion, could be anything, but how does each person in that church experience their religion and their relationship to that? Same thing with governments. You have a party line, but then you have different subgroups, and then you have, you know, individuals that dissent at a town meeting or like whatever. What does it look like in practice? Okay, cool. So you can use the empire, but then remember that like Finn was part of the empire.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I think of Norm, you're a big fan of G.I. Joe. Right?
Yeah.
And lots of other things. But for example, with G.I. Joe, you had G.I. Joe's group, and then it splintered off into different groups, correct? Cobra
Right.
was.
That's actually interesting because I think in my writing I do tend to be black and white. I don't have as many shades of gray, and I think that's because I tend to I tend to think of the group in terms of like metaphor.
Gotcha.
The group symbolizes something, and actually Cobra's a pretty good example. Like all the Cobra soldiers, they're just cannon fodder for the heroes. Same thing with stormtroopers until you get a great idea, like, oh, what if a stormtrooper, you know, defected, and then you've created Finn, and you can go with that.
Or Tag and Bank.
Yeah. Oh,
Or who?
that book is great. Tag and Bank. It was like
Tag
Rosencrantz and
and Bank.
Guildenstern, Star Wars. Where was it? Oh, but the metaphors and the like, if there's an evil group, like I try to make it mean something thematically, and then not worry about the individuals. Like it can just be the group, and that tends to work okay.
And what about you, Shannon?
My answer to this is going to vary because I'm multiple kinds of creators. I do creator-owned stuff where I am my audience, so if I'm making myself happy, then that's answering a lot of the questions. If I am working on Star Wars, or I'm working on a Spider-Man thing, or Danny Phantom, or Jimmy Neutron, or any of these other things I've worked on, then it's who is the audience. And if the audience is boys ages 6 to 8, the thematic stuff that I'm going to do is going to be completely different than if I'm working on a rated R horror movie, doing boards on that. So I think knowing your audience, knowing the targets and the limits what you can do, I think helps as a storyteller, because you're able to utilize your skills in the best and most appropriate manner.
Right, so you're not getting those, or if you're using a monolithic, thank you, forgot how to talk. Yeah.
If you're talking about the Senate in a Star Wars movie,
Right.
that part may not resonate with the audience. Funny, despite what all the adults think, funny, slapstick, Jar Jar stuff,
Right.
it does resonate with younger audiences. So,
Right.
yeah. I knew when I went to a school, an elementary school, and I made a Jar Jar joke, and it was quiet. So, that's when I realized, oh yeah, just because me and my friends, as the audience, are having a conversation, my children and their friends are having a completely different conversation. This movie is meant for all of us, so I will take the parts that I like, and they will take the parts that they like. And so sometimes as a storyteller, you have to go like, no, I'm just going to do my own thing over here, and I'm going to limit my audience to a much smaller. That's okay if that's where you're going with it. But if you're reaching out to everybody, then you have to start thinking like, how does everybody else see this?
Right.
So.
Now, what would you say is the most, and then we're going to open, this is going to be the last question, then we're going to open it up to everybody else. What would you say is one of the most clever things you've done in world building? So what is one particular thing you thought, well, I am so clever having come up with this? Like, for example, for me, I do a book called The Only Living Girl. In it, the main characters go through different civilizations and they meet with each one, and each one's different. There's like a mermaid culture, a flying insect culture, and in an upcoming volume there's going to be an elephant culture, and their currency, rather than using money, is trading secrets about one another.
Oh, that's right. I never forget.
Right. So and so it's really like we're trading in secrets, and that's crazy. And I thought, wow, that's really fun. So when they go to marketplaces and when they like smuggle like black market information, they wear masks so that you don't know who they are. But it's really like that aspect. I felt like, oh wow, I feel really clever having added this thing that I think adds this level of depth to my story. So what one particular thing you have done that made you think like, wow, I'm hot shot shit in your world building process?
All right. So, this is actually something that didn't make it into the book. But so the HAPHAVEN that I was talking about earlier about luck, we developed a steampunk leprechaun society. And I decided that the reason it was steampunk, the reason they use steam is because there's an element in the story of getting jinxed. And when you get jinxed, you turn into a monster, and there's a black cloud floating over your head that's raining on you all the time. And so I developed an army of jinxes that were the enemies of the leprechauns, and whenever they were taken prisoner, they were put into these batteries where they would just stand there, and their rain was going down into the steam engines. And that's what was powering like everything. And then there was going to be this great thing in the third act where the jinxes rebelling, like teach all the imprisoned jinxes like how to turn their rain off and how to take control of their own fortune, and would shut down the power to the whole city. But all of that was just way too big for the narrative and the story I was trying to tell about this one little girl, so it's all gone. None of that's in there.
Oh my goodness.
That's
But
so good.
it was great, right?
Steampunk leprechauns.
The steampunk leprechauns are still in there. It's still like a leprechaun steampunk thing, but like all that about the batteries and everything, like and there's only one jinx in the whole book. Like,
Volume 2.
Volume 2.
yeah. So don't tell anybody because it's gonna show up again. But yeah, that was it.
Does anybody here know who Jim Lee is?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So Jim was my boss, and this is where I got to put some of my writing / artist side into my editorial. I went through the archives and found all of Jim's unused drawings that nobody had ever seen, like his version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, before he got around to doing Fuji and all these other characters. And rather than going, oh, these are just different drawings of the same character, I told the artist, these are all new characters. Each one, we're going to throw it in. We broke in the world. There was a chance to throw all of these characters in. And then I got to walk into Jim's office and be like, check this out. And Jim was very happy. So that made me very happy. And that's the most clever thing I ever did, was basically getting the boss happy. Because I have all these awesome Jim Lee sketches now on all my birthday cards from several years. So thanks, Jim.
I slang in the wilds. There are So the basic setup, very quickly, is that humanity has survived by forming these small walled settlements, and the only people that can travel between are runners, and they live in this compound, which is basically the USPS and like the black market. So they're the only people with cars, any way to safely travel in Zombieland, and they have a very particular slang to them because they get to go out into the real world and see all this stuff, so they have a different perspective. And I thought it was clever to have plant-based slang.
Oh, that's awesome.
I thought it was cute. So they call the zombies, they call them Venus flytraps and stuff like that. And then they talk about there's a cult that didn't make it into the book, but they worship the zombies, and they like basically sew pieces of plants into themselves and stuff like that, and the zombies leave them alone. And I never got to explain why that is. And they call them well, tree huggers, but like there's all kinds of like this ridiculous plant like slang that they have.
That's awesome. Yeah, so we're going to open up to questions you guys may have about world building, so feel free to answer any. Okay, go ahead.
Do you ever have the experience of like you're building a world or a series and you think you've got all your bases covered and you get like issue 3 or 4 and you're like, oh crap, forgot about how the money works or something. And then like, well, how do you handle it? I mean, if it's something that's already been released, I mean, have you encountered that or how do you handle that?
Editors.
Ooh.
Yeah, I was gonna say the entire industry used to encounter that on a regular basis because nobody was keeping track. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in it's okay to pivot because the Marvel Universe existed fine for years before everybody got really bound into continuity, and so did the DC Universe. And the editor, somebody would write in and be like, hey, you said on Planet Z, Superman's hair turned blue, but we're back 30 years later on that planet, now it's green. And somebody would be like, ah, crap, kid. All right, let's fix it, we'll retcon this. Retcon.
Yes, retcon.
Retroactive continuity. That means you fix it later. You made a mistake, you just act like you knew what you were doing. Happens all the time. I think Paramount is a perfect example. They're pivoting now, and they're doing it in a great way with a lot of the new Star Trek stuff. But their continuity became a collar rather than something that aided you as a storyteller, and so they would constantly tell the writers, hey, you can't do that because there was a novel that came out 16 years ago that said this, and now that's in the rules. Instead of going, you got a great story, this is really good, let's figure out a way to make these two work together, and just fix it later.
Kind of like, have you ever heard, like, you kind of like walk into anything if you just act like you belong there? It's kind of the same thing. It's like, if you're like, oh, I messed up with the money, well, all right, I'm going to do what I need to do for this issue and move on. And then if somebody comes up and asks you, like, hey, in issue 2, the money was like this, in issue 4, the money was like this, just go like, yeah, we'll address that, don't worry. Like I planned it the whole time, and then eventually they'll forget.
Well, and that's actually what made the Note Prize such a valuable aspect of the Marvel Universe, is that when fans came up with the answers, and it was the best answer, they'd be like, yes, let's go with that.
That's the one.
And yeah, and then they literally Marvel used to literally send empty envelopes that just had printed on it an official Marvel Note Prize. And that to me was the best thing.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I mean, obviously, you want to plan out through the floor, but sometimes, success breeds an opportunity to create a new direction that you weren't planning. Go back to Lost, season 1. I had friends that worked on that show. They didn't know where all of that was going. You were right. All of you were right. They pivoted. They went, holy crap, this is a huge hit. This is awesome. We all have jobs next year. Season 2. And so they took the narrative in a direction where they kind of had thought that it might go, but hadn't worked all of the details out. So it's good to plan ahead, but then sometimes if what you're doing is super successful, maybe you didn't think out what happens after Return of the Jedi, or where you were going with your next thing.
Or even thought about the fact that maybe Luke and Leia shouldn't be kissing in Empire Strikes Back.
Let's not think about that.
It also helps to think in story arcs, like if you're doing an ongoing series, like, okay, the first 6 issues are going to be a story, and kind of get that down so you won't run into the money issue because you've outlined that whole story and you know what those are, and then hopefully your discrepancies wouldn't show up but through other arcs, but that would still need somebody to sit down with the trade and read it and not run into that.
I think that this should be a really important takeaway if you don't leave with anything else. Remember that one of the important things is as you're outlining your story, outline your world. because that will really give you a guidebook in terms of how to move forward. So really looking at as you're writing that story outline, as you're writing your character outlines, make sure that you're also writing the world outline. It gives you at least a basic overview of where you can go from.
I think of it too as like, all right, if you handed this to a particularly precocious child, and they would ask you why about something, figure out that why. So like, we take a lot for granted because we're adults and we've learned to navigate the world. We're like, for example, your money thing. Okay, well, why does the money work this way? Does it have to work this way? No, I guess not. So you can like, not only pivot because you didn't plan it out, but also this is a new opportunity to do something weird. And I love weird stuff. So, you know, just think about what a kid would ask you and then answer it.
Right. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, so I have a question just about the video game industry. So do you guys as writers have to kind of change up your approach as you see games like Fortnite and like free-to-play multiplayer games rise in popularity?
Well, right now this is a complicated question, but I'll answer it very quickly. Well, games right now are moving away from a single-use game to now games as service. So right now, more and more games are moving away from that single player, I just bought the game, I'm going to play the game for the rest of my life, to more, I bought the game, now I can subscribe to ongoing content that perpetuates for 1 to 3 years. As those games add more content, they change and become more flexible with the marketplace.
Yeah, so I just want to know, kind of just if you guys have to like, if that makes you kind of change or approach the industry differently.
No, I think right now, no, because of the way that the game as service industry is working to adapt to sort of complement games like Fortnite or Call of Duty or whatever. So right now, I think the industry is largely shifting to a games as service model, which is basically buy the game and then subscribe to Netflix version to get all the downloaded content, the daily updates, the weekly updates, the monthly updates, the seasonal updates, the new content, the new skins. I think all of that immersive experience is what people are subscribing to, and I think that ultimately, in a world building level, you're going to start to see more of these sandbox style games add more and more to the worlds with every update.
Gotcha.
Yes, all the way in the back.
As an adult, when you're writing, you want to write a genre for a teen or kid, how do you learn about, these different worlds, to get the ideas on how to write for that age group that's much younger than you are?
I ask.
Yeah.
I do. I ask, like, when I'm writing stuff for younger, like, kids, I ask them, like, what do you like? What gets you excited? I have lots of nieces and nephews, so, like, I'm lucky, but, like, you know, if you do school visits or something, you can ask. And also, research.
Yeah.
I read everything that I can get my hands on that is in that age group that works and connects with that audience, because not everything will. But, like, what do kids, not their parents, actually like? Okay, why?
Well, and to be fair, even if you don't have kids within your relative circle of influence, you've probably been a kid, and you probably remember not necessarily the particular brands of Power Rangers or what the names of all the characters in Steven Universe are, but you might remember being a kid and having that feeling of wanting to have independence and wanting to have a sense of wonder, a sense of discovery, a sense of new opportunities, a sense of having your own agency. You know, you can hold the themes without necessarily having all the particular cultural benchmarks, because one of the great things about world building is you can create those new things.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite movies is Heathers. And one of my favorite movies is Heathers, and one of the things that Heathers does right is that they realized that they wouldn't be able to create words in the 1980s that kids would use because by the time the movie came out it'd be dated, so they created a whole new slang, you know, and that really became fantastic for them to really build off of. So like the characters in that movie are speaking in slang that really, or even in Harry Potter, characters are speaking in slang and language that they've built completely from scratch. And that's something that you can think of. You can create your own Power Rangers in the game or in the whatever you're writing to be that cultural stand-in for whatever it is you're using.
Yeah. I think 'cause there's in terms of research, this movie 8th Grade, it's got an incredibly accurate voice. It's about kids in 8th grade, and the writer director went online and he watched YouTube videos of 8th graders, like their like video diaries basically, and he paid attention to what was important to them and what they were saying and everything. And then he made a movie about 8th graders that most adults wouldn't want to show to an 8th grader. Like, it's a little too real in a sense, versus if you were writing something for 8th graders, then yeah, you kind of just try to remember what that was like. And I think kids tend to look at story as authority. Like if the story's confident enough, they just go like, oh, that's what's cool. That like it's telling me that's what's cool, versus going like, oh, I don't think that's cool.
It's also too, I think looking at psychology, like actual like child psychology, and seeing what certain age groups can kind of conceptualize is really important. So like, you know, I've written some stuff for different ages, for like YA and middle grade. It's like, okay, people in this age range really don't, it's not that they don't grasp the concept necessarily, but they don't care about certain things because it's outside of their kind of purview, right? And that expands as you go on. So you look at the kind of language that you will use in a thing and what actually connects with that age range because of like the weird soup that their brain is in that like age. So like teenagers are basically like on LSD all the time. So like what, that's what their brains are doing, right? So what is it that connects with people that age?
And yeah, watch the stuff you know they love. Also, like just spend an afternoon watching Nickelodeon, and you'll be like, oh, okay, this is what's speaking to them. It's, like you said, like take in the research, see what other people are doing.
Watch all of Shannon's shows.
Yes, clearly. I really am sad we didn't get Spider-Man 29 minutes.
But we do have my episodes of Spider-Man coming up September 8th.
See what I did there? Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes, all the way in the back.
How do you balance knowing when you're dealing with a new subject or world, balance like the research that you did and then the previous work that's already been done, by but also trying to add like your own personal touch?
You're the only person that can write your story. So like, you can write about anything, but it's always going to be from your perspective. And as long as you push that and what you find important, I think your voice comes through. So finding the way to use the tools to enhance your voice, I think, is what you're trying to do.
Get a version of it out. Write like 5 or 10 pages about the story you want to tell before you start the research, and that'll help you. Like, oh, this is what I need to research. Like this is like if I'm going to write a medical drama, and it turns out the story I want to tell is entirely about like the behind the scenes like financial decisions of a hospital. I don't need to really figure out how the gallbladder surgery works. Like I can, like figure that out. Then go do the research based on like what your heart was telling you the story is about, and that'll help you zero in on that part of it and keep you from researching. I know people that have been researching stories they want to tell for years and years and years because they don't know, they're just researching a topic forever.
Yeah, don't get paralyzed by your research. You know, have a plan for the research the same way you have, you write the outline of what kind of story you want to do, and then figure out the amount of research and give yourself a deadline basically on that so that you're not suddenly a gallbladder surgeon before you write the novel where there's one scene with a gallbladder surgery that people are going to flip the page to hurry up and get to the rest of it. So.
And you can always, especially when you're writing a script, you can always skip that part and go back and write the rest of the story. I know writers who write for TV shows who do that all the time.
Sometimes you gotta rewrite a lot if you do that though. I've done that. Like, I go back and go, oh crap, but in that surgery this would happen, and so that will domino effect my whole life. Working in like media that comes out regularly is really stressful.
How many gallbladder surgeries have you written in your comments? Because I'm sensitive.
We've all, that's what we do.
That's how Stan Lee cut his teeth.
So, yes.
So you make games, the type of games you make are like a video game, or like box games?
I write Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon for Ubisoft, and it's a video game. So yeah.
When you make video games, how do you come up with the creators make these games work where they fight and fly and do all this kind of stuff?
We work with a whole team of people that are way outside of I just write the game. So I work with narrative designers, game designers, story leads, and we all work together as part of a team to iterate what the game looks like from top to bottom. So it's a team of like over 260 people, and each person has a role. So I don't program how they fight. I just write, there's a fight here. And then I let the players integrate with that, but I'm writing the story missions and like, oh, this is a stealth mission, so there's going to be some stealth here. So, but I write the dialogue, I write the themes, I write the characters, but everybody else does all the other stuff. Yes, Stargirl.
Thank you. Do you find it easier to write with, I know you just said you work with a whole team of people, but like one of my friends and I, we want to write a comic together, and we've started doing the world building, and she's like, no, let's do the characters first, and I'm like, but you should be doing the world building first, because I know that to build your characters, you have to have the world. But do you find it easier to work with people to actually build the world, so that when you're in a creative rut, you have a wall to bounce, you have someone to bounce ideas off of, and then you're like, oh, and you get the ball rolling again?
So I'll let everyone else speak for themselves, but I can tell you that for me at least, it goes hand in hand. So I work with a creative partner, and when we come up with stories, one of us will be like, oh my goodness, I have this crazy idea. And we'll call the other one up on the phone and be like, okay, here's the high concept, blah, 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 blah. And then be like, all right, so what kind of characters would need to exist in that world? What kind of archetypes? So the concept for us always comes first, and then the characters that live in that world. And then everything else comes from there. So it can just be a line. What if there were zombie killer birds, you know, and they attacked a lighthouse?
Whatever.
Whatever. What if there were zombie killer birds and they attacked a lighthouse? Who would be in that lighthouse, and what kind of story would that be about? Would there be a cop? Would there be a school teacher? Would there be a little annoying little 6-year-old? You're like, what would that look like? So what would the archetypes build be? And then we build everything around that. I don't know how everyone else here works, but we'll start with Vita. How do you let the characters exist first, or do you let the world exist first, or is it in?
When I co-write stuff with my friends, which is mostly if I'm co-writing, I'm working with my friends. If we're creating it kind of whole hog, we start very basically with like characters, but not fleshed out. We'll be like, all right, so I'm writing a book called The Quarter Killer with one of my best friends, Danny Lohr, and The Quarter Killer is a character who was a hacker for a corporation and said, screw the corporate life, that's bad, and is now the cyberpunk Robin Hood of the Hood. That's just what we started with. We were like, what if that? What if Robin Hood, but like cyberpunk and brown, and in the hood?
Oh, that's so cool.
And then from there, we were like, all right, they're a hacker. What does a corporation look like? Oh, okay, cool. So that's what corporations work like. Well, what if their partner was like this thing? And then we kind of bounce back and forth. But it's always, for me, started with a very basic outline of like 1 to 5 characters if it's an ensemble. But it does, you can't do the whole thing of either one without the other. That's almost impossible. So you have to kind of jump back and forth and kind of fill in the lines and color it in and stuff.
And if there's a way that you can get an editor, like an impartial, don't get like a third friend, because then you're gonna like 2 of you are gonna team up against the third. If there's an impartial voice of reason that says like, you hired me, I hired a freelance editor for HAPHAVEN because I knew like this is full of rules, it's crazy, like help me focus in. And they say like, okay, this is what you told me the book wanted to be, like this is what you need to be focused on. You're over here doing this other thing, and that's not.
You're over here doing
so
jinxes.
that helps you figure out like, oh, okay, I do need to figure out the world so that this character can accomplish their thing, and then what kind of character would accomplish that thing. And if you have that impartial voice that helps you see, then that's really the best advice I could give.
No, 100%.
And Shannon, do you have anything there?
I'm just going to be super quick because I think we're at time. I see super talented writer friends of mine at the back who are probably about ready to bust on stage. But I was going to say, whatever, we all approach story and the creative process differently. So if your friend is enthusiastic about getting it done, let them be enthusiastic, you be enthusiastic, everybody, because it's really hard making stuff. So the more you can, whatever it takes to get you excited about it to where you actually get the work done, then that's what you should be doing.
Wait, there are 2 of you, right?
Yeah.
You do one, you do the other,
Yeah.
and then argue about how it works together later.
Yeah.
So real quick, as we wrap up, where can we find you guys? Shannon?
I'm in Artist Alley. I'm not going to tell you exactly where because I like a lot of the people in Artist Alley. So look around for me. I'm in the middle. Say hi. Ask me the questions you were scared to ask in front of a room full of people.
Norm?
I'm in 1304. I'll tell you exactly where I'm at. And he's across the way.
It's like a hint.
Vita?
I don't exist in real life. I'm on Twitter. Definitely Vita. That's my Twitter and my Instagram. I'm floating around the con, so if you see me, say hey. Happy to answer questions or be enthusiastic about nerds stuff.
And I'm at booth 1205. Thank you all very much for coming. It's a
Thank
delight.
you.
Please stick around for
Thank
the
you.
other panel. Thank you all very much. Have a great day.